Man, things were for work today. Hey man, how you do? Well, this was unexpected. I didn't expect him to just bite the dust like that. I couldn't even ask him how he felt about the entire performance. How else am I supposed to become a host in some kind of sissy club somewhere in the underground if I can't get someone to review the work before I go in and apply? I'm gonna find a better way to do this. You, on the other hand, since you have already got yourself like pissed dead over there, you can have this piece of shit. Suits you, considering what you are. Poor. Oh god. Oh god, I had the craziest dream that like something fucking oh god, so that's where he got the idea from. I don't know how he even managed to pick the one that ended up the Kuso Game of the Year runner-up as well. I mean, at least he was nice enough to live this with me, so I guess we can make that video to tell him why he's a fucking moron for trying to follow what I was in this game. Okay, sure. Why not? Let's get going. Contrary to what some people might believe, it's actually not that easy to make a good and interesting visual novel, and I get what some people might say. They're like, oh, it's just a game where you just have still images of characters and text, it's not that difficult to make. But the reverse is actually also true. If you think about it, the fact that many of the best visual novels out there are able to bring tears and be so memorable to people even 20, 30 years after they've been released is precisely a really amazing achievement because of the fact that they are working within these technological limitations as well, meaning that they are using everything else at their disposal in order to give you a very good and entertaining time. Things such as the music, the writing, the voice acting, the way that they cut in and out, even with the character still images as well. There's a lot of moving parts going on in the background that are still very necessary to provide an interesting experience. That said, that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're here to talk about the worst of the worst. And in fact, we actually have talked about some of them in the past as well, where we talked about the Kyarage, which was the Rosen Maiden visual novel, which was basically just a reenactment of the original plot from the anime manga with some additional changes here and there, as well as the Sengoku Hime's PlayStation release, which was such a buggy mess that it ended up becoming a complete clown show in spite of the fact that the original PC version was still not as bad as how the PS2 version ended up. However, the one we're talking about today is also unique in its own way, because while the Rosen Maiden one wasn't bad enough to end up on the list itself, even though it was notoriously bad, and Sengoku Hime ended up the worst game of the year for one of the years, these two games share one thing in common, which is that it's typically about a guy, and you have multiple girls, or cute, waifus if you might, then you're supposed to just like get along with them and eventually get with one of them potentially. And with the game that we're going to be talking about today, it is unique in its own way because of the fact that it is the only game on the Kusoge of the Year ranking where you actually play as a cute girl and you try to get together with the husbando of your dreams, baby. Because the game we're going to be talking about today is Labyrinth Zero KissKiss Labyrinth. Look, this just bear with me. I know it sounds like the corniest name out there, but I'm not making a meme. That is actually indeed the name of this game. Labyrinth Zero KissKiss Labyrinth. So, Labyrinth Zero KissKiss Labyrinth, or Love Route Zero KissKiss Labyrinth, is a game that released on the 28th of April in 2010 for around 6,800 yen. This game essentially came out in the same year that Monster Hunter 3 did, and also, if you want a more fitting comparison perhaps, it also came out in the same year that Tsubahime did. So we're talking about that level of visual novel when we're talking about visual novel, And we're also talking about that level of game, and we're talking about like game releases that were coming on at the time, even for portable consoles. The company that made the game, Dempo, was also one that has been operating since 2005, and that had a large focus on mostly making ports of visual novels as well as helping to make IP tie-in games, kind of like this one for other companies as well. So they aren't exactly inexperienced in the field, and they do have a fair bit of experience working with visual novels, and they do have some level of experience also developing games with a full gameplay system within them as well. So suffice to say that they are a company that should have known what they were doing to at least some extent. For those who are wondering, when I say IP tie-in, yes, Labyrinth Zero was actually a manga that was released on a internet manga's web, I guess the equivalent of like the Japanese webtoon websites of the day. And you can actually still find the manga online in its complete form if you're actually interested in reading it after seeing this game. That said, more importantly than the story that this was based on is the fact that, according to many sources within Japan at the time, apparently in the first week of sales of this game, it did so badly that it only sold 1,000 copies at the time. Now, this is something that I actually can't find any information on data about. It is actually logged on the Kuso Game of the Year website, but it doesn't have any links to any sources of where the information came from. So it's really just hearsay from almost 16 years ago. Yeah, this coming after the retro, like, anime doujin event, this kind of hurts a lot, doesn't it? 16 years. I feel like how I felt when I heard that Cardcaptor Sakura came out in the 90s. And there isn't exactly a way for me to double check with the company either, because of the fact that the company that made this game actually went bankrupt and closed down 6 months after the release of this title. Yes, this game actually became the final nail on their coffin, which is even worse than what happened to Image Epoch, in my opinion. From the news of the era as well, this game apparently had been in development and actually got delayed by 1 year during its development, which, especially for a visual novel focused game, development delays actually tend to be really massive, since many of them are made on fairly thin margins at first. When they do well, they do really well and they earn a lot of money, but until then, even a 1 year extension or delay because of the number of people that you have to pay to keep fed, even popular visual novels earlier in the years didn't sell insane numbers either, could spell the death for many companies as well. In fact, the game actually did so badly that the creator of the original IP for the manga itself actually came out and apologized at the time as well. But that's an Otome game, which is the term used when talking about visual novels where you play as a female character and you get a bunch of big manly men surrounding you, like the sofa picture thing. How did it actually manage to break out of the confinement that is the Wotaku space and break its way into the Kuso Game of the Year ranking, which typically, has mostly titles that target the general gaming audience as well as the more male-oriented bishoujo game side of content? Let's find out together. So first up, the opening itself is extremely cliche, which I guess is no surprise considering the era that it came from. It has those very romancy visual novel dating simish vibes that it feels like a modern anime would put into a episode as part of a parody or something. And it's especially the case considering the fact that it does feel at some points like the seiyus, the voice actors who are singing these segments, are going off tune. I do feel like overall it actually isn't too bad, but with the opening itself, especially in the post-Haruhi era where the idea of character songs and like seiyus being able to sing to some extent has become more and more important, it feels weird for them to actually get seiyus to sing the opening and have them be like off-key in this way as well. And this is especially the case when you consider the fact that with many bishoujo games out there, you really do have many titles with very solid openings as well. You had Kotoko, who was pretty much everywhere and can do a pretty solid opening, has done many solid openings for many visual novels out there, and who has also done stuff for even recent titles such as like for Nidigo Overdose, for example. This is also post-Move Love Alternative, which, like Asue no Hoko is like stellar, like all-star cast, but the song itself is so hype. And I get what some people might think, that I'm being a little too nitpicky by talking this long about the opening of a visual novel, the thing you would only see for like maybe a minute or so, and most people will skip through when starting up a game. But In the end, it's stuff like this that actually gives people a good first impression of the product they're getting into. And done well, it can actually get people hyped up for the product that is to come after it as well. So it is a very important first impression if you're going to do it. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. But I feel like it's better than doing something subpar and giving people a worse impression and worrying about what they're gonna see next, right? Even for something such as Last Rebellion, for example. Yes, the game was shit. Yes, it gave me a headache at points. Yes, I wish I could just turn the game off multiple times during the game. But at the very least, every time I fired up the game and I heard that opening, right, Mr. Dragon Ball, Mr. Chana singing the opening, at the very least, it got me hyped up to face the horrors that were ahead of me. This, unfortunately, did not do the same for me. While we're on the topic of the Seiyuu speaking, the entirety of this game is voiced. Like, it's actually fully voiced, which is really impressive considering the fact that many visual novels, shoujo games that came after this are also not fully voiced. And it is kind of terrifying to think about when you consider the fact that for the game industry in general, voice acting is typically more expensive than with something like anime, for example, because with anime, well, you are paid by the blocks of time that you have spent recording. With games, you are paid by the word instead, so fully voicing a game, a visual novel, even if it's fairly short, is still a very expensive experience. And so the fact that they actually did everything, not just the in-game characters speaking, but the menu as well, when you open it, actually like voice cut-ins and the like. It's actually really impressive, and they also do something that maybe it's a little more common in the female Otome game side of space, but not so much in the visual novels, the shoujo games, is the fact that the main protagonist is also fully voiced. 静かだよね、ラビリンスって。私たちの世界と比べるとシーンとしててちょっと寂しい感じがするの. Which I think is actually kind of cool that all of the characters are voiced. I kind of get why for some games they don't do it, because like there is that feeling of like you're watching someone else get together with the character instead, and some people really don't like that feeling, which is why I find it surprising that they fully voice the female protagonist in this game. And the funnier thing about all of this is the fact that the female protagonist is actually by default voiceless. Yes, that's right. They actually recorded line dialogue, voice lines for every single line of dialogue that the main character has, but they turn it off by default, and you have to go to the options menu the first time you start up the game and turn it on instead, which is certainly a way to spend your budget. At least the money is going into the game and making it better. At least it's not disappearing in the thin air and maybe going into drugs like with Overworld no Kizuna. So I guess there's a little less to complain about there. The voice actress that voices the female protagonist of this game is actually the person who voiced Ryder from the Fate Stay Night original series as well. Yes, they actually did get Asakawa Yu to voice the main protagonist of this Kusoge. I feel like I'm getting the same level of like revelation as I did when I found out that the guy who voiced Saitama from One Punch Man actually voiced the main protagonist of Overworld no Kizuna, to be honest. And I just find it doubly funny because of the fact that the female voice actress, the Seiyuu that they got to voice the main protagonist, is just involved with a whole bunch of visual novels like Magikoi as well as like animes that are on the funny, sassier side of things, such as with like Ikito-sen as well as Shinmai Mao. So I don't know if she's the best choice here, but it is quite an interesting fun fact nonetheless. That said, when it comes to the game itself, you know, as I mentioned before, with a visual novel, there are many things that you do need to actually take into account that many people take for granted that are actually being done pretty well behind the scenes to ensure that your experience overall is smooth and you can focus on the story and the music and the characters rather than on everything else. So things such as how you interact with the menu, how easy it is to actually move through the dialogue as well. You know, the memes of that people make online about like how, you know, to be a professional like visual novel player, you need to be really good at pushing the button like really, really quickly. Like that isn't exactly a thing either, considering the fact that, you know, most of the visual novels, especially nowadays, have an auto feature. And most of the time, even when it comes to the auto feature, like ensuring that the speed of the text scroll is fast enough that people can read, if like they read fast, they can just read the text scroll without feeling like the tempo is being broken because of the fact that the text is crawling at the same speed or it feels slow compared to the audio, which in general with anime, with like most otaku content, the way the characters speak is already a little bit slower than with how people usually speak in real life. So for people who really want to read the text first, you kind of want to like speed it up so people can read the text while enjoying the audio at the same time. Things like ensuring that the audio loops properly or loop seamlessly if you, depending on how you want to actually play it in the background when the character like images change up on screen, ensuring that they actually blend naturally on top of the background as well. These are all things that sound very simple, but we're playing a game that actually fucks up more of these things than you would imagine. The game does have an auto and skip feature as well. However, the way both of these are implemented are both really bad as well, in the sense that for the auto feature, you actually have to push start to open the menu, and then you have to go into the menu, go to options, and then turn on auto from there, and then close the menu completely again. And the thing is that whenever you open the menu, one of the characters will have a short quote and say something, and while the voice line is playing, you can't actually move through the menu as well. So you actually have to wait for the voice line to finish or skip the voice line by pushing the circle key an additional time before you can actually move through the menu. So there's a lot of small little things here and there that just ruin the tempo and make the pacing of even doing something like navigating a menu a lot slower, and increases the number of button pushes people have to get through just to do the things that they need to do. So there's a lot of stress built up in this sort of areas as well. And the worst part of it all is that this also does mean that if you want to turn off the auto at any point, you need to then open the menu, go back to the options and turn off the auto feature again. So there's a lot of button inputs just to actually start and stop the auto every single time. And the more problematic thing about all of that is the fact that while the text is crawling and the character is speaking, you can't actually open the menu to turn off the auto, which is a real problem considering the fact that the moment the character's voice line ends, if there's another voice line, it immediately progresses into the voice line, meaning that between the two voice lines, you have this tiny frame of, oh, can't do that. The Koreans are gonna get mad at me. There's a tiny little spot where you can actually push the start button before the next line starts to open the menu to get to the auto feature to basically turn it off. So if you really just wanted to auto and like you missed a specific line of dialogue and you wanted to go back and double check on it, or let's say you just wanted to like go to the toilet after this line ends, you can't just like in most other version novels push the auto button, which is located within the game itself, like typically like somewhere on the text box, for example, you might show a little auto button, or you just push a specific key to on your keyboard or your controller to just turn on and off the auto. You don't have any of that, and so you can't just easily turn it off when you need to do something else. You need to pray to Odin, like Amaterasu, whichever fucking high heavens you believe in, and hope that it opens, or you just have to go through another bunch of dialogue again until it finally does. And the skip feature as well. Skip features in many games as well. Typically, it's just a button you push, and it will skip all of the already read text. Like on default, usually it will only skip text that you have already read before. There is a lot of thought that goes into deciding where the default is for something like a skip feature, for example, as well. For this game, the skip feature is by default off instead. You actually have to then set it to either all text or only unread text. But even after you've set it, unlike most games where you push a button and then you can go hands-free, right? You need your hands for something else more. I can't make that joke here, I think, anymore. I already have a community guideline warning because of the previous version novel video. I can't take the risk anymore, guys. I'm sorry. But yeah, unlike in other games where it's just a push of a button, which I think even some RPGs have it for that matter, with this game you actually need to hold down the R1 and then it will start to skip through the text for only as long as the R1 button is held down. So it feels like, in a way, it's a lot closer to how the auto feature should have been designed instead. But instead, for some reason, they decided that it was better to make the skip feature more controlled like this instead of the auto feature. So you can't just go hands-free while skipping and only coming back when you actually reach new dialogue, because you need to hold down the R1 button to actually progress through all of it. And not only that, but the speed at which it actually autos is really slow as well. I feel like with most games, they actually just completely just cut through every single scene that would actually happen. Like It's really just loading the text and the character, instantly clearing it, and then moving on to the next box and the next box and the next box. But with this game, you actually still have to go through a slightly faster text scroll of each of the individual lines just without the voice acting like playing at the time. The game also doesn't really have a quick save, quick load feature, which some people might be wondering why you even need a quick save, quick load in a visual novel. It's not like you have QTEs that are gonna kill you. It does help as well because sometimes, when you get the multiple options popping up, while it might say a specific line of dialogue, sometimes the way that the dialogue might progress onward from that point may diverge from what you expected the first line to mean, and therefore how you expect the character to react to the person who's speaking to them. And so being able to quickly save and load without having to open up the menu, click save, select a save slot, and then do all of that kind of helps so that people can go through the multiple options to pick the one that actually feels the closest to what they were initially thinking, even if they aren't trying to metagame it. And so when it comes to the way that the visual novel segment itself is designed, it does feel like many things are very archaic, and they are experimenting with things that in terms of the QOL, or at least the quality of life experience, should have already to some extent been experimented with by other companies, and they can just pick and choose from how those have already been done to just provide a at least bare minimum like serviceable experience, instead of having all of these implemented in a way that would instead give people more stress the way it was actually implemented. However, were this game only just a pure visual novel dating sim, this video would probably have just ended here, and there wouldn't be even more of an extension of the bar below that you can see over here. Rather, this game actually has a little more to it as well. Clarinet? Ew! Ew, Dango, green hair girl that got a guy fired from work, ew. I shouldn't say that, it's actually a really good game, but however, I would say that this game is, in a way, a little closer to something like the original early runs in a sense. Well, I mean, the characters aren't like runs at the very least, so that's probably a good thing for this game since it's rated 0B. I think it would be a real problem. It might have been a big controversy for the industry of like a 0B game was actually like runs, but that's not important now. What I'm trying to say is that it's a game where there is a dating sim visual novel segment, but there is actually a fairly big amount of a gameplay segment as well. Because not only is this game a visual novel, it's also an RPG! What do I mean? Well, how about I just show you the first ever battle. This is the tutorial battle that you get within the game. So, a couple of issues with the tutorial of this game. Well, one, it actually expects that you already know how a RPG game works. Like, there isn't a simple like, hi, these are the options, pick this to do the thing. Like, oh, here's your swap button. What does the swap button do? Yeah, pistol, click on it and figure out. Except that you don't even have the characters to use the swap button on. Why does this button work and the other one not? Don't worry about it. You figure it out when the game goes along. Like, none of the things are actually really explained to the player, and it kind of just assumes that you either read the manual that comes with the game, little booklet over here that every game back in the day used to have. To be fair, as a kid, I used to really love to read these booklets that came with the game. Like on the way home, I think I mentioned this in the previous video as well. Like after purchasing the game, I'll be on the train or on the bus and I'll just be like reading my way through the thing, like studying as I took the train back home and get excited for the game. And I guess, they do have the analog like control scheme over here, so if you actually read the manual beforehand, you would know, but if you didn't read it, then yeah, sucks to be you, I guess. Because the game really doesn't have any form of control guide or any form of tutorial to teach you how to do the battle. They just kind of assume that you already know all of it. With modern games, because of the fact that you don't have these manuals anymore, most games started to incorporate the teaching into the game, but I feel like it's a thing that should be fairly standard across the industry for the most part, where as long as it is possible for you to do it, you probably should just do it, because it makes it easier for people to understand and to like commit further into enjoying and learning the game, rather than them spending some time getting frustrated and confused as to what is happening. That said, more important than that, you might think that, aside from that, like, yeah, they didn't teach you anything, but this seems like a very fairly normal tutorial battle. Like, you just beat the monster on like 2 hits. I don't see that issue. Yeah, that actually continues for the entirety of this game because holy shit, the balance is fucked. Because while the game does have a battle system that is fairly similar to what you find in most RPGs, which is what in Japan we'd call a command battle system, the system itself is kind of lacking everything that will make it work in an RPG game to begin with. For the most part, you do go through many battles throughout the game. I mean, that's pretty normal, in an RPG game. You do battles like in Final Fantasy from the start till the end. You fight the big bad at the end. The issue with this game is that you pretty much can deal with almost every single battle in the game in just 1 to 2 turns of just pushing the attack button. So there isn't really anything like special skills that you feel like you are incentivized to use. And even when you do use them, the animations on them are very, very lackluster.
行くよ、和也くん。一気に決めるよ。一撃必殺。やれやれだぜ。
And the icing on the cake of all of this is the fact that the game doesn't even let your characters level up. So that means that there is no actual character progression throughout the game. When I say that at the start of the game you're killing opponents in 1 to 2 turns, and at the end of the game you're still killing opponents within 1 to 2 turns, that is without any form of progression whatsoever. The game actually does give you gear, kind of, but the issue with the gear as well is that you don't actually need to use it because of the fact that you kill enemies within 1 to 2 turns anyway. The only thing that the gear actually helps you to do is hit the damage cap so that you can end everything in the first turn. There isn't any form of strategic usage of gear, any form of gear progression that makes it feel like without the gear and proper accumulation of said gear, you can't progress. And on top of that, the game doesn't actually give you any form of tutorial to begin with that you even have gear. The gear itself kind of looks the same as the affection items the game gives you. So things like a clean white shirt, like the dress shirt for example, that is a gift item that you will give to the character. And then you will get like unique cutscenes, the same for like the butler outfit. Things like that give you unique scenes with each of the individual characters with unique art that actually isn't in the original work. So it's cool that they have that for the affection side of things. But the issue is that then the gear themselves, which are also very identical, do not really have icons or anything of the like to make it easy to differentiate between the two. It all kind of makes it very unintuitive what you're even supposed to be doing to get stronger in the game either.
Alright boys, it's time for us to get ready to go into battle. Those monsters might be anywhere, so it's best to be prepared.
Alright, I've been waiting for this. Let's go get those nerds.
Alright, I've got some protective equipment for you. Here's a suit. It's bound to protect you from all of the evils of corporations.
Wait, a suit? I don't want to wear anything this stuffy. How is this even going to protect me more than what I'm wearing anyway?
Oh, and aside from that, this is for you. Here's a gift.
Wait, but that looks even more like gear.
What? No, you can't use this as equipment.
At least I could wear that over my jacket for even more protection, right?
Well, that's because you ain't gonna be wearing anything under this, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but he's got a gun.
Yeehaw! Well, yes, but he brought that along, so that's different. Now, come on, let's get going. No time to think about any of this.
And the more confusing thing that is further worsened by the UI itself is the fact that there isn't a gear section in the main menu itself when you first enter it. So you can see character statuses, your items and the like, but it doesn't outright state that you have gear that you can equip. Instead, you actually need to go into status, select a character, and then the gear slot is within the character's menu. So basically means that in order to even identify that gear exists in this game, you need to go 3 menus deep, which is a little too much to expect for the casual gamer, especially someone who is here for a dating sim, to actually dig 3 menus deep just to realize that there are other systems that they need to interact with to get stronger. That and there are really weird system choices that I can't even tell if it's supposed to be a bug or if it was done by intention to punish players for being stupid, because you can basically use a block input within the game which would allow a character to block an attack for a different character, so they can't defend themselves, they have to defend someone else. Pretty cool, pretty selfless. You can get everyone to block for the main character, I guess, and get a kick out of seeing everyone get injured for you if that's your thing. But the thing is that you can actually block for someone who has already been killed in battle, which, you know, to be fair, maybe they just didn't realize it was a thing because of the fact that you would be really hard-pressed to even get someone KO'd in battle in the first place. Like, it's not like the game is 1 to 2 turns of hyper-intense battle. This isn't like some epic Yu-Gi-Oh! Battle where some guy is gonna pull out his combo and the other guy needs to respond to the combo. It literally is just you taking minimal damage and you just dealing maximum damage to 1 to 2 shot them. Especially when you consider the fact that you actually have the other character, the junior in the school, who basically just has a fucking pistol. And so I guess you could say this game is basically the Simpsons of Japan, because it kind of did predict in a way the assassination that happened with a homemade fake gun and all, so well played to this visual novel for picking up on that. He just shoots enemies with and deals like half the damage towards the damage cap within a single hit, so you know, you don't really need to block for the most part because you never really fall into situations where you need to block. And according to the manual of the game as well, supposedly there are status ailments in the game like paralysis and stun and the like, but yeah, apparently none of that had ever triggered for me. I went online to look at what other people were saying about the game, and they were saying that apparently specific enemies within the game have a chance to use it. Which, you know, is a little very difficult to identify considering the fact that there's only one fucking enemy design! Every enemy is just that one snake. Like, it doesn't matter, like, where in the game, how far you progress, aside from maybe, like, the final boss, which is just alternate version of main character's friend. All of the enemies in the game are just that one snake with different parameters and different skills. So, you can't really even identify well which one it is because they don't have names that make them different from each other, and they all look exactly the same. And this is also further worsened by the fact that every single encounter in the game is fully random and is basically non-essential to the game's progress itself. And on top of that, this game's map progression, basically the way you would encounter enemies on the map, it's not through like running through a dungeon and getting random encounters which you can then figure out if, you know, an enemy has a bunch of skills from because you're constantly meeting enemies. Instead, the game kind of works on a menu system, kind of like the older PlayStation Portable Persona 3, where you just menu your way through the game rather than walking around on the world map itself instead. And every time you choose to go into an area, the day would then progress. It kind of happens like this, and whether or not you meet an enemy is randomized when you enter the area. So one day has 2 slots, the game runs through maybe like 20 days of actual gameplay. So you only really have 40 encounter chances, not even a guaranteed encounter. On my first playthrough, I think only encountered enemies on 4 out of the 40. So realistically, you're almost never going to even meet the enemy that has a status ailment. And even if you do, it's really difficult to identify as well. So overall, it does feel like the battle system is very lacking. Granted, it's not meant to be an RPG first, but I feel like even among visual novels, there are many that do try to incorporate gameplay elements and that do a far better job of it than this game does. Which, speaking about the map movements before, I do find the way that they deal with map movements in this game to be very confusing. It's kind of similar to the system that you had in Nogia, where you had a physical like image of a map and then you just like run around points on the map using like a cursor to select the point and you just enter it. You know, many RPG games, especially in the older days, did this. Many of the Kuso games we have played on this channel have also in fact done this. I think every single one from Alvandia Story all the way to Nogia, as well as the bigger titles like Toki and Towa, all did this. So it's not that uncommon both in that space and in the more mid-tier budget RPG game space. But the thing with this game in particular that makes it worse than every other game, even including Nogia for that matter, which is quite an impressive bar to be able to beat, is the fact that the game doesn't really show you on the map where areas you can actually go to are. Like, they literally just gave you a JPEG of a giant map and they expect you to just push right on the cursor over and over, see where the cursor scrolls through, and then remember that all of these different areas are areas that you can go to, which it's really difficult to even do something as simple as that because 1, you don't really have a button you can open to just shortcut open and have a list of every single area that exists, and 2, when you push right and scroll, it actually just jumps randomly across the map. Like, it's not like it's going in a circle or there is like some order that is flowing through on the map to ensure that it naturally goes through every single point. Instead, you can basically just jump from the top right of the map all the way to the bottom left, which would then also cause the screen to scroll across because you have no way to zoom out to look at the map in its entirety. Which basically means that if you really wanted to go to a specific area, it's actually kind of difficult to do that. But, it's not like it actually even matters that the map is very difficult to intuit, because when it comes to this game, every single thing that can happen on the map is fucking random! Yeah, I'm not joking. Like, everything, right? Enemy spawns, I mentioned before, are random, whether or not they'll happen when you enter an area. Item drops, so like things like the bond items, the gear, all of that is also random based off the drops as well as like exploration. So there is a real chance that you might actually go through a run where you get 0 pieces of gear. Like, as silly as it sounds, it is a thing that could potentially happen to some people. Character events on the map as well. So like things like when you go to a specific area with specific characters in your party, because you can only take 2 of the characters with you along at any given time. While those might seem to be not random because of the fact that you go into the area, there's the background behind them and they're talking across the background, making it feel like it's a scripted event, kind of like with Persona, where you have to go to like specific areas on specific dates to meet specific people so that you can learn that your teacher's grooming you or something. None of that. None of that. No scheduling for you, no thinking for you. You wanted to think, the only thing you need to think about is that man digging that you are a cool person. But yes, even the character events are random, and the thing with that is that it's not like it even matters in the first place, because it doesn't matter whether or not you get the character events, you still get the same amount of bond relationship points for bringing them along with you on that specific day. So like nothing in this game actually really matters in terms of the gameplay, which is kind of very bizarre to me, considering the fact that with this game, a single playthrough, even if you actually try to invest your time to reading the story, is maybe 3 hours gameplay out of 6 hours of actual, like, a full-length playthrough of the game. So 50% of the game is this, but the 50% that you play through, which mind you is an actual like decent chunk of the middle, because of the fact that they give you a lot of story at the start which follows the original game, they give you some story at the end, they give you character segments in the middle that you have to trigger yourself. But aside from the character segments you trigger yourself, the entire middle point of the game is just this entire RPG system, the battles and the map movement, and nothing else. Meaning that you could basically play through the entirety of this segment, not even interacting with the scrolling around and like going to area to area. You could just constantly click on the initial starting area to get through the game as quickly as possible instead, because none of anything that's happening around you actually matters at all. And to me, that is just in general really bad design, because it basically takes away all player agency in a game that looks like it's trying to give you agency. Like, it feels a little bit like when you're playing like Pro Golfer Saru, for example, where you feel like you're playing a golf game, only to realize that you're playing the equivalent of a point-and-click adventure pretending to be a golf game, because as long as you click on a specific spot with the specific right timing, you will get the same result every time in that game. But this is that, but even worse, because it doesn't really matter where you click on the map, at which point it just brings up the question of, why is this feature even in? You could have just made the game about the plot itself, make it into an actual full visual novel like the Oreimo, the Sister Fister game, and you could just have the people who enjoy it just like enjoy what they wanted from the game in the first place, which is just to see character moments and, you know, get some fan service, some moments with these side characters or the main characters that were just not in the anime, and they would already be really happy with the product for the most part. However, this brings us to the next point, which is I don't know what they did with the plot for this game either. Like, you would think that the bare minimum is you would just try to make the plot as close to the original as possible and just leave it as that. Like, the biggest cash grab you could do is literally just do a 1-for-1 of the original manga or anime. And, you know, in the case of the manga, at the very least, you know, you can just say that like, yeah, but they get it voiced and colored, so it's kind of better in some ways for the people whose brains have been shrunk by TikTok. At least it ends up being fan service for the people who enjoy it. If you just did this for an anime adaptation, people might say it's shit, but in this case, we do know it's not only just a manga, it's a web manga that you can find online instead. So it's something that to begin with is very small. So even getting something like this, I would imagine for the fans is already a pretty big thing. However, this game somehow managed to mess up even that bare minimum. But that's it. But before we talk about what this game got wrong, let me just say, I'm not gonna shit too much on the overarching plot in this game as well as the character writing to some extent, because of the fact that, well, for the most part, a lot of this is based off the original work. So like, if the original premise is kind of bare bones and shitty, if the original art is kind of bare bones and shitty, it would reflect into the final product of this game as well, because there's only so much they can do to change things up before it becomes completely unrecognizable from the original work. Because one of the big criticisms that many people in Japan give this game is that the art design of it looks very doujin. That is to say that it looks like it's a fan-created or a individual solo work or something to that extent, where you're talking about people creating things on their own without any external help, and for the most part, most people do it for hobbies rather than for commercial use, so the quality can vary a lot. And so even if it looks a little bad, people tend to look the other way. So people were saying that it kind of looked like that. But considering the context that this was a web manga to begin with, so especially back in that era, it would have been something that was done at very low cost. There was no publication that was actually like printing books of this physically for people to purchase. The fact that the plot to some extent is a little lacking at points, the fact that the art is a little doujin looking, to me it's fine, because it really is like an amateur novel in a way, and you don't really expect like super high quality from them, considering the fact that this was like one of their first few works, and due to the fact that this was not something that the publication that actually pushed this out online probably expected either in the first place. However, the problem is that the people who made this game, it feels like they didn't even put in the smallest modicum of effort to try and get the scenes to make sense at points, because some things like within the manga themselves, they were already not too well delivered, so it was a little difficult to pass what was going on to begin with. Let me just give you guys a quick context of the opening of both the game and the manga, because yes, they actually butchered it right from the start. That's how amazingly quickly they actually managed to do it. At the start of the manga, the main character, the heroine, she actually gets confessed to by a guy, and she outright just tells him, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend," and that's how the game starts, which it's kind of bizarre when you think about the fact that this was turned into a visual novel, because you're gonna get together with all of the other guys, and she's already like, "I have a boyfriend" at the start, so like, what the fuck is this like NTR plot premise here? I know that like in Japan, like NTR, according to all of the big sushi sites out there, it's at the top for all genders, so everybody really likes their cup chair, I guess. But even then, what the fuck? This was supposed to be like a web like teenage romance drama. What the fuck is going on here with all this cheating and all? But either way, she rejects him, and then suddenly an earthquake happens, and then a bookcase falls. He blocks the bookcase because it was about to drop on her, and once that happens, they both get transported into another fantasy world. No, they didn't get isekai by a truck that just flew out of the air through the window of the school to hit the bookcase into them, killing them and sending them to this other world. Rather, this was the era where your isekais, if you even want to call it that, were just more akin to something like Zero no Tsukaima, where you just kind of get teleported into the other world, and then you can still easily like find a way back to your world. So within this scene, however, it was already not very well delivered within the manga, because what happens is that when he blocks the bookcase for her, before they get transported to the other world, you get multiple things happening. The girl goes through a flashback, and it cuts to a scene of her current boyfriend getting hit by a car. And it's so abrupt, and the paneling in the manga doesn't really do a good job of showing that it is a flashback. So it just looks really weird, because it looks like he blocks it, then you cut to another guy But with the manga, at the very least, after that, they go through an entire segment explaining her getting saved by him, the conversations they had, and how they ended up together after he had saved her. The game just cuts all of that out. So the game just basically goes like, ha! I blocked the thing, and then it cuts to a different guy on the floor, like some like shitty stunt double from like some B-grade movie or something. And then she screams, and then they're immediately in the other world. Because the thing with the game is that while this takes place in a fantasy world, there is actually a fair amount of plot progression in the manga that doesn't take place in the fantasy world. Rather, it's about the people in the real world realizing that people are going missing, how they try to figure out the mystery, and then also like get themselves stuck in this wall and figure out how to go back, and like a whole bunch of things happen in that vein. But the thing with the game is that it cuts out all of that. So a lot of the things that are actually fairly key character points that actually end up developing along the way because of the fact that like characters are missing and the people in the real world realize that, and therefore realize that they can act however they want to some extent. It kind of leads to specific points being developed in a way that gives the characters more depth. Like, for example, with her current boyfriend, while she is stuck in the fantasy world with the other guy, we learn that he's actually kind of fucked up as well, and that he's actually been fooling around with adult women, which is certainly a plot point as well. So like he actually is like one of those like like hostess playboys that it's not explained in the game at all, because the game doesn't show any of the scenes outside of the fantasy world. So he actually just looks like a very regular, like serious, good kid that just gets cucked for no reason because of the fact that you decided to be a bitch in the game. But with the context of the manga, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because of the fact that, you kind of, as the viewer, know that he's already being a kind of playboy like this, but at the same time he also has feelings for her, because when all of these things happen, while he's alone in the world, he's getting all the press, he feels insecure, even though all of these other women want to get with him, he doesn't really like any of that. There's a lot of things happening there, all of which is just gone because they just decided that they didn't want to bother with it. So like a lot of the character development, a lot of the things that make the characters and the relationships they go through actually feel like they have weight, most of that is just gone. I don't know why they did that. This is like wild to me, because we played the Rosen Maiden visual novel, which is also considered a Kusoge in Japan, that had an entirely unique fucking animation, like Easter egg, that people are posting on YouTube and not knowing where it comes from. Like that's the level that we're on. Like they actually had unique scenes, both in terms of the visual novel format and unique, complete, like little Easter egg animations in it. Like even with the character models, they were actually properly putting in like thicker lines so that it represents well on the visual novel format, since like you're using like static backgrounds instead of like a proper like fully designed scene like in the anime. So even when they reuse things from the anime, if you actually took a closer look, you can kind of see that things are actually different. Like the characters, they have been drawn in slightly different, like they were probably traced instead of just directly put in, and you kind of do get a little bit more out of it because you have unique CG art scenes as well as all of the different dialogues that happen within the game. With this game, you do kind of get that, at the very least with the character scenes, but it turned into a full fan servicey thing that doesn't work as well for casual users. Like with the visual novel for Rosen Maiden, like maybe you didn't have access to the internet, so this was your only access to the IP. You would still get more or less the plot from the first few episodes of the show. With this, you don't even get the full first volume of the manga because a lot of it is missing. And while the character scenes, yeah, they were kind of fan servicey and they were still fairly well done if you're into like seeing your favorite character playing dress up with you, a lot of the actual character stories were missing, and because of that, it just ended up becoming a very shallow dating sim cuck simulator instead. Because while you do get unique endings with all of the different characters, since the game actually lets you get together with all of them, there is such a lack of a story throughout the game, because once again, all character events are more or less random. You only really get into like the relationship in the game in maybe like the last 2 to 3 out of the 25 days. So for the most part, the game is almost identically played every single time with barely any changes or impact from your actions. And all you get is rewarded with like maybe 1 or 2 scenes at the very end, which kind of give you just that little bit of fan service that is the different endings, as well as maybe like the costumes that you see along the way. But once again, everything along the way is random. You may not even get the costumes. I played through the game like 5 times. I had one run where I got 0 of the costumes. So I couldn't even like play dress up with my husbandos to like see what unique scenes the game has. And on some other runs you get 3 or 4. So there is a lot of issues with even that kind of simple like gift giving. And at the very end, you just feel like you just rush into a relationship with the person because of the fact that everything just is very backloaded in this game instead. But yeah, for the most part, that's all I really have to say about the game. It's not the worst thing that we have seen so far. It's at least something I can say. However, at the same time, this game does have many of the usual issues that we tend to see with many of these Kuso games, which is the fact that it's very hard to pin down and identify who this game was truly made for. I feel like if you were a fan of the series, you would probably hate this game for cutting out many of the scenes that probably made the IP that you like interesting in the first place. If you didn't know the series, like the people on the Kuso Game of the Year list who played this game, it's even worse because it just feels like the plot is extremely bare bones. Fan service scenes as well aren't all too well written in my opinion, since they're all very short and it's just like palette swap of all of the different characters getting into the same costume and then making a commentary about the costume as well. The endings were a little lackluster except for if you went for the main 2 male characters in the original work as well. And the bare bonesness of the battle sequence also means that you would be robbed of almost any form of potential fun you could hope to have if you just did not know the series getting into it, because you would not get a good understanding of the series. You would just have a very boring experience both plot and gameplay wise. Frankly, you probably would feel like you got scammed for your 6,800 yen at the time. Like, let's be serious, you could be getting way better things on the PS2 with that money, to be honest. But that's it. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all in the next one. Once again, as always, thank you to the people who helped to support the channel. I know not everybody supports for the same stuff, but even then, I hope you enjoy these types of videos as well, since these Kuso game videos, to me at least, they are fun to make, and also to me, as someone who works in the industry, playing them is fun, and the sense of that, like, you also kind of get to do a post-mortem of what makes a bad game bad at times. And it's kind of interesting seeing how many of the things that we talk about in these videos, they feel like they can also still be used to analyze things or games that come out after, like especially when it comes to like who the game is designed for. I feel like that's a very big part of game design that even till this day in Japan sometimes gets left at the wayside or forgotten when a title is being designed, hence why some titles fail. But that's it. I'll be seeing you on the next one, and until then, take care and bye-bye.